The champagne in Chun-Li's crystal flute shouldn't shimmer like oil on water. It should be golden, effervescent, celebratory. But Shuga knows the difference between expensive and expensive with intent. She spent 6 years watching things that shouldn't be there. Lipstick shades on collar edges, pauses before her husband says her name, the way his associates bow to her with their spines but not their eyes. Tonight, under the amber glow of the family estate's chandeliers, the wrongness in that glass is the loudest thing in a room full of polite Korean and carefully avoided English. The introduction. Shuga is 32 years old and has been disappearing in plain sight since the wedding photos were filed away in albums no one opens. She is the cultural translator of the Lee family empire, the Black American wife who learned to fold her personality into the corners of traditional expectations, who raises their children to be bilingual in language and loyalty, who hosts parties where she is both hostess and ghost. The family gathering unfolds in the Lee ancestral home, where power is measured in seating arrangements and silence, where her pale cream silk gown, selected by Chan's assistant, never by Chan, marks her as both decoration and outsider. She moves through the evening with the precision of someone who has learned that perfection is the price of being tolerated, not loved. But while Chan's business partners calculate shipping routes and territorial expansions, while the matriarch in her burgundy Chanel suit observes the room with the stillness of a woman who survived 5 decades by noticing what powerful men dismiss, Shuga is the only one who sees it. The iridescent distortion in her husband's champagne glass, placed precisely where he'll reach for it the moment he finally arrives. The room smells like galbi and expensive cologne, and the particular tension that comes from waiting for a man who has forgotten he's late. Chun-Li's empire runs on fear and logistics. His marriage runs on Shuga's exhaustion. Tonight, one of those systems is about to collapse. Subscribe to see how this unfolds and comment where you're watching from. I will love to say hello to you just to know how far our story is going. The Outsider's Gala. Shuga had learned to read a room the way archaeologists read layers of sediment. The Lee family estate in Pacific Palisades was a monument to controlled opulence, where every vase cost more than most people's cars and every conversation carried the weight of unspoken hierarchies. She moved through the gathering like a dancer who'd memorized choreography in a language she'd never be fluent in. The guest list was a map of Chan's world, shipping magnates from Busan who still spoke to her in broken English despite her fluent Korean, second-generation logistics operators who treated her like an expensive mistake, and the inner circle of the organization, men whose business cards listed import-export companies but whose eyes cataloged exits and angles of approach. Shuga had set the tables herself, arranged the catering from the Korean fusion restaurant Chan's mother approved of, and made sure the children were upstairs with their tutor, safely removed from the machinery of adult politics. Mrs. Lee. The voice belonged to Director Park, a man whose shipping empire stretched from Long Beach to Seoul. He didn't look at her when he spoke, addressing a point somewhere over her left shoulder. The japchae is excellent. You've done well. She smiled the smile she'd perfected over 6 years of practice, grateful but not too familiar, present but not intrusive. Thank you, Director Park. I'll pass your compliments to the chef. He nodded and moved away, back to the cluster of men discussing container routes and territorial agreements in rapid Korean that deliberately excluded her. Shuga understood every word. She'd learned the language in the first year of marriage, thinking it would bridge the distance between her and Chan's world. Instead, it had just given her a better understanding of how thoroughly she was dismissed. The matriarch watched from her position near the fireplace, a fixed point around which the party orbited. Chan's mother was 70 years old and had the bearing of someone who'd outlasted 3 regime changes and 2 husbands. Her burgundy Chanel suit was immaculate, her silver hair pulled into a bun so tight it could have been architectural. She caught Shuga's eye across the room and offered the smallest incline of her head. Not approval, never that, but acknowledgement. It was more than most people here offered. Shuga checked her phone. Chan was 40 minutes late. The servers were beginning to hover near the kitchen, uncertain whether to begin the main course. She could feel the room's temperature shifting, the way conversations grew slightly louder to compensate for the absence of the man who was supposed to be their center of gravity. She texted him, "Guests are waiting. ETA." The response came 2 minutes later, "Shipping crisis. 30 minutes. No apology." No acknowledgement that this was his mother's birthday celebration, that she'd spent 3 days coordinating every detail, that their children had made cards that were sitting upstairs unopened. Just logistics and the assumption that she would manage the fallout. Shuga slipped her phone into the hidden pocket of her gown and signaled to the head server. They would proceed without him. They always did. She moved through the room with practiced efficiency, refreshing drinks, smoothing over the awkwardness of the guest of honor's son being absent from his own mother's party. The conversations parted around her like water around a stone, present but ultimately unchanged by her passage. She heard fragments, territorial disputes in the harbor, a rival organization making moves in San Francisco, concerns about federal attention on shipping manifests. And then she saw it. The champagne flute sat on the marble side table near Chan's usual chair, positioned exactly where he would reach for it upon arrival. The liquid inside caught the light wrong. Where it should have been uniform gold, there was an oily shimmer, a distortion that moved independently of the bubbles. Shuga had grown up in Atlanta, had worked her way through college as a bartender before meeting Chan at a medical charity event where he was laundering reputation and she was serving canapés. She knew what champagne was supposed to look like. This wasn't it. Her heart began a different rhythm, something slower and colder. She glanced around the room, searching for the bodyguard who'd been assigned to the house tonight. He stood near the entrance, professionally alert, his posture the perfect picture of vigilant protection. But when he noticed her looking, something flickered across his face, not concern, but calculation. The kind of look you give someone when you're measuring whether they've noticed what you hoped they wouldn't. Shuga's hands didn't shake as she picked up an empty tray from a nearby table. Years of being invisible had taught her to move through spaces without drawing attention. She drifted toward the champagne flute with the studied casualness of someone straightening up after guests, her mind working through the architecture of what she was seeing. Someone had poisoned her husband's drink. In his mother's house. At a family celebration. Which meant either spectacular arrogance or insider knowledge. She looked at the bodyguard again. The too smooth deference, the way he'd positioned himself with sight lines to the table but not protective proximity. The way he was watching her now with an intensity that didn't match his relaxed posture. The front door opened. Chan's voice carried from the entrance hall, already mid-sentence in a phone conversation, already bringing the crisis with him into the celebration. Shuga had maybe 30 seconds before he walked into the room and reached for that glass. 30 seconds to decide whether to scream a warning, to knock the glass to the floor, to expose the conspiracy and shatter the careful neutrality she'd built over 6 years of marriage. 30 seconds to decide whether she wanted to save the man who'd let her become a ghost in her own life. The late arrival. Chon Li entered his mother's birthday celebration the way he entered every room, as if it had been waiting specifically for him to give it purpose. The sharp lines of his Tom Ford suit were slightly rumpled from the car ride, his phone still pressed to his ear, his free hand already gesturing to someone Shuga couldn't see, probably his operations manager, probably about the shipping containers that were more important than his mother's 70th birthday. I don't care what the harbor master says, Chon spoke in clipped Korean, his jaw tight with the particular stress that came from managing an empire built on timing and secrecy. Find another route. Reroute through Oakland if you have to. Just handle it. He ended the call and finally looked at the room. His eyes passed over Shuga without stopping, catalogued his mother near the fireplace, counted the important guests, assessed the state of the party with the clinical efficiency of a man who measured everything in terms of strategic value. He didn't notice the tension. He never did. Yamianim. He crossed to his mother, bowing with the proper formality, speaking in the formal Korean reserved for elders. Forgive my lateness. Business required immediate attention. The matriarch's expression didn't change, but something in the way she held her wine glass suggested volumes. Your wife managed beautifully in your absence. As she always does. It should have been a compliment. In her mouth, it sounded like an indictment. Chon turned then, finally, to acknowledge Shuga. His eyes found her across the room with the same distracted efficiency he brought to everything. The party looks good. Thank you. Thank you. As if she were the event coordinator. As if she weren't his wife, the mother of his children, the woman who'd learned to translate herself into something that fit into the gaps of his life. Shuga felt the familiar numbness spreading through her chest, the emotional anesthetic she developed over years of being appreciated like good furniture. He moved toward his chair, toward the champagne flute that sat waiting like a loaded gun. Shuga's body made the decision before her mind caught up. She stepped forward, her silk gown swishing against the marble floor, and reached for the glass. Chan's hand was already extending, his fingers inches from the stem. Let me get you a fresh one, she said, and her voice sounded strange to her own ears, too bright, too eager. This one's been sitting out. It's probably flat. Chon frowned, the expression of a man whose schedule doesn't allow for small domestic concerns. It's fine. I'm not. But Shuga already had the glass in her hand, the weight of it heavier than it should be, the liquid inside moving with a viscosity that champagne shouldn't have. She could feel the bodyguard's eyes on her from across the room, could sense the sudden sharpening of attention from the matriarch, could see Chan's impatience manifesting in the way his jaw tightened. Shuga, I said it's fine. Give it here. He reached for the glass. The room seemed to contract around the gesture, every sound suddenly muffled, every movement suddenly slowed. Shuga looked at her husband, at the man who'd once promised to build a life with her and had instead built an empire that had no room for her in it, at the father of her children who didn't know what books they were reading, at the partner who'd forgotten how to see her. The champagne caught the light, that wrong shimmer dancing across the surface like oil in a parking lot puddle. Shuga's pattern recognition, honed over 6 years of reading micro-expressions and unspoken hierarchies, assembled the pieces. The bodyguard's calculated positioning, the poison's expensive sophistication, the timing that suggested intimate knowledge of Chan's schedule, the fact that someone had bet on Chan being distracted enough not to notice. And she realized something that made her hands steady instead of shake. This wasn't just an assassination attempt. This was a message. Someone in Chan's organization thought he was weak, thought his foreign wife and his divided attention made him vulnerable, thought they could kill him in his mother's house and get away with it. They were probably right. "Chan," she said quietly, "how long has it been since you actually looked at me?" He blinked, thrown by the non sequitur, his hand still extended for the glass. "What?" "Shuga, I don't have time for 6 weeks." The words came out flat, factual. 6 weeks since you've had dinner at home. 3 months since you've put the kids to bed. I can't remember the last time you said my name without also checking your phone. The room had gone quiet now, conversations dying like candles in a draught. The matriarch's eyes were sharp and focused. The bodyguard had shifted his weight, his hand moving infinitesimally closer to whatever he carried under his jacket. Chan's expression cycled through confusion to irritation to a flash of something that might have been guilt. "This isn't the time or place." "When is?" Shuga asked. "When would be a good time to tell you that I've become furniture in my own life? That your children are growing up with a father who's more myth than man? That I'm so lonely in our marriage I sometimes forget what my own voice sounds like?" She raised the champagne flute, watching the liquid catch the light. Chan's eyes widened slightly as he finally looked at something besides his strategic concerns. As he saw what she was holding with the attention he usually reserved for shipping manifests and territorial disputes. "Shuga." His voice had changed, dropped into a register she barely recognized. "Put the glass down." But Shuga was already lifting it to her lips, already making the choice that had been building in her for months, for years, for every moment she'd spent being perfect and invisible and utterly erased. "To your health," she said, and drank. The 3-second choice. The poison tasted like almonds and endings. Shuga's biochemistry degree from Georgia State had taught her enough to recognize cyanide variants, and this was something in that family. Sophisticated, fast-acting, probably aconite based on the oily viscosity. She had maybe 3 minutes before the cellular asphyxiation started, maybe 5 before irreversible damage set in. The room erupted into chaos around her, but Shuga felt a strange calm descending, the kind of peace that comes from finally being seen. Chan's phone clattered to the floor, the first time she'd witnessed him drop it in 6 years of marriage. His hand shot out to grab the glass, but she'd already stepped back, already swallowed enough that intervention was academic. "What did you do?" His voice was raw, stripped of its usual controlled pragmatism. "Shuga, what the hell did you do?" The matriarch was moving with surprising speed for a 70-year-old woman, her burgundy Chanel suit a blur of decisive action as she barked orders in rapid Korean. "Get Dr. Yoon. Lock down the house. Nobody leaves." Shuga set the empty champagne flute on the marble table with careful precision, her hands not yet shaking. The bodyguard was trying to fade toward the exit, but 2 of Chan's inner circle had already moved to block him, predators recognizing the scent of treachery in one of their own. "I saw it," Shuga said, and her voice sounded distant to her own ears, like she was speaking from underwater. "The shimmer. The wrong viscosity. Someone poisoned your drink, Chan. Someone who knew where you'd sit, when you'd arrive, how distracted you'd be." Chan grabbed her shoulders, his face closer to hers than it had been in months. She could smell his cologne, see the panic cracking through his usual armor of cold efficiency. "Why would you drink it?" Why wouldn't you just tell me? Because. The word came out softer than she intended. Because I'm tired, Chon. So tired of being the shock absorber for your empire. Of being the translator between you and our children. Of being perfectly helpful and perfectly invisible. She felt the first wave of numbness starting in her fingertips, the toxin beginning its cellular assault. And because some part of me wondered if dying might finally make you remember I existed. The confession hung in the air like smoke. Chan's fingers tightened on her shoulders, his carefully constructed face finally showing something raw and unguarded. Horror. Grief. The beginning of understanding. You can't mean that. His voice cracked. Shuga, you can't. But her knees were already buckling, the elegant silk gown suddenly too heavy, the chandelier light too bright. She felt Chon catch her weight, felt the room tilting as her body's systems began their cascade of shutdown. The last thing she saw clearly was the matriarch's face, those survivors' eyes understanding what perhaps no one else in the room had yet grasped. This hadn't just been an attempted assassination. It had been a mercy. Shattered celebration. Chon Li had never felt anyone die in his arms before. He'd ordered deaths, certainly. Had witnessed the aftermath of territorial disputes and betrayals. Had built an empire on the calculated application of force and fear. But he'd never held someone he loved while their heartbeats stuttered and slowed, while their skin turned the particular gray that meant oxygen wasn't reaching tissues, while their eyes stayed fixed on his face with an expression that looked almost peaceful. Don't, he said, and the word broke on the way out. Don't you dare. Shuga, don't you dare leave me. Her breath was shallow, labored. Her lips were already taking on a bluish tint. The champagne flute lay on its side where it had rolled from the table, a small pool of iridescent liquid spreading across the marble like a promise of death. The room had transformed from a birthday celebration into a crime scene. Guests pressed themselves against walls, uncertain whether they were witnesses or suspects. The bodyguard was on his knees, arms behind his head, while two of Chan's enforcers held him at gunpoint. The matriarch had cleared the main table, was already laying out space for an emergency medical intervention with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd survived this kind of chaos before. Where's Dr. Yoon? Chan's voice was a roar that made glasses rattle. Where the hell is he? 12 minutes out, someone called back. Traffic on the 405. 12 minutes. An eternity measured in failing heartbeats. Shuga's hand found his jacket, fingers clutching the expensive fabric with weakening strength. The kids, she whispered. Don't let them see me like this. You're not dying. Chon said it like a command, like he could impose his will on biology the way he imposed it on shipping routes and territorial disputes. You're not allowed to die. You don't get to decide that. Her words were slurring now, the neurotoxin affecting her motor control. You don't get to decide anything about me. You stopped deciding years ago. You just left me to decide for myself. What to wear, what to say, how to raise our children, how to slowly disappear. Each accusation was a knife, made worse by the fact that Chon couldn't dispute any of it. He'd been so focused on building the empire, on maintaining the careful balance of power and fear that kept the Lee family at the apex of West Coast operations, that he'd forgotten to maintain the foundation. He'd treated his wife like infrastructure, essential but not requiring active attention. He'd let her become so invisible that she'd had to nearly kill herself to be seen. "I'm sorry." The words felt inadequate, but they were all he had. "Shuga, I'm sorry. I'm so goddamn sorry." She tried to smile, but the expression was wrong, muscles not cooperating. "That's the first time you've said my name without checking your phone." Her eyes rolled back. Her hand went slack in his. The last of the color drained from her face as her heart began its final, desperate struggle. Chon looked up at his mother, at the woman who'd survived decades of this life, who'd buried one son and seen another become colder than winter. "She can't die. I won't let her." The matriarch's expression was terrible in its compassion. "Some things, my son, are not ours to control." But Chon wasn't listening. He was pressing his fingers to Shuga's throat, counting the fading pulse, breathing for her when her own breath stopped, refusing to accept the mathematics of mortality. His phone was still on the floor where he'd dropped it, screen cracked, notifications piling up about crises that suddenly meant nothing at all. The empire could burn. Let it burn. As long as she lived. The medical abyss. Dr. Yoon arrived in 9 minutes instead of 12, which was still 8 minutes and 30 seconds longer than Shuga's brain could safely go without adequate oxygen. He came through the door with an emergency medical kit and the expression of a man who'd seen this particular crisis before, because in the Lee family's world, poisonings were an occupational hazard. Chon was still performing CPR, his expensive suit jacket discarded, his white shirt soaked with sweat. Shuga's body was limp in his arms, her pale cream gown now the exact color of death. The matriarch had taken over respiratory support, breathing for her daughter-in-law with the mechanical efficiency of someone who'd once trained as a nurse before marrying into the organization. "Move," Dr. Yoon barked, and Chon did, stumbling back to give the doctor access to his wife's failing body. The party guests were still frozen against the walls, caught between the impropriety of witnessing this intimate disaster and the danger of leaving before being dismissed. Dr. Yoon worked with ruthless speed, adrenaline injection directly into the heart, activated charcoal through a nasogastric tube, for lines pumping what looked like milk through her veins. "Hydroxocobalamin," he said, more to himself than anyone else. "If this is aconite, we might have a chance if we caught it early enough." "How early?" Chan's voice was raw. 3 to 5 minutes from ingestion for full effectiveness. Dr. Yoon's hands didn't stop moving, checking vitals, adjusting flow rates. "How long has it been?" Chon looked at his watch. The crystal was cracked, probably from when he'd dropped his phone. 7 minutes. Maybe 8. Dr. Yoon's expression tightened, but he didn't slow down. "Then we pray she's strong. And we get her to Cedars Sinai. Now." The ambulance ride was 11 minutes of hell measured in heartbeat monitors and oxygen saturation levels. Chon sat beside the gurney, holding Shuga's hand, watching the numbers on the screen fluctuate with a terror he'd never experienced in 3 decades of violent business. The matriarch had insisted on riding along, her burgundy suit now wrinkled, her perfect composure finally showing cracks. "She knew," the older woman said quietly. "Before she drank. She knew it was poison. I know. And she drank it anyway." Chan's jaw worked. "I know." The matriarch was quiet for a long moment, watching the 4 drip chemicals into her daughter-in-law's veins. "The bodyguard confessed before you left. Said he was paid by the Park faction. Said they wanted you distracted, compromised. Said a boss who couldn't protect his own wife in his own mother's house was a boss who'd lost control. Chan's hands clenched. I'll handle it. You already did. His mother's voice was sharp. You let your marriage deteriorate so badly that your wife chose poison over another day of being invisible. The Park faction didn't create your weakness, Chan. They just exploited it. The words hit like physical blows, made worse because they were true. Chan looked at Shuga's face, at the oxygen mask covering her nose and mouth, at the cardiac monitor showing a rhythm that was still too slow, too irregular. Her dark skin had gone ashen, her carefully styled hair was coming loose from its pins, and even unconscious and dying she was the most real thing in his life. She can't die, he said again, to his mother, to God, to whoever was listening. I won't survive it. The matriarch's hand found his shoulder, squeezed once. Then you'd better figure out how to give her a reason to live. Because jewelry and apologies won't be enough. The hospital was ready when they arrived. Dr. Yoon had called ahead, and Cedars-Sinai's toxicology unit was the best on the West Coast. They took Shuga away into an ICU suite, hooked her up to machines that breathed for her and filtered her blood and measured her body's desperate fight for survival. Chan watched through the window as a team of specialists worked with choreographed precision, their faces masks of professional concern. A different doctor came out after 40 minutes. Mr. Lee? I'm Dr. Patricia Hammond, head of toxicology. Your wife is stable. For now. For now. Dr. Hammond's expression was carefully neutral. The aconite caused significant cellular damage. Her heart stopped for approximately 90 seconds before Dr. Yoon's intervention. We've got her on full life support, and the hydroxycobalamin seems to be binding to the toxin, but the next 12 to 24 hours will be critical. If she makes it through that, we'll have a better sense of long-term damage. Long-term damage, Chan repeated. You mean brain damage? I mean we won't know the extent of the neurological impact until she wakes up. If she wakes up. The world tilted. Chan felt his mother's hand steadying him, keeping him upright. Can I see her? 5 minutes. Then we need to run more tests. Chan walked into the ICU suite on legs that didn't feel entirely stable. Shuga lay motionless among the machinery, tubes running into her arms and throat, monitors beeping out the irregular rhythm of a heart that had nearly given up entirely. He pulled a chair to her bedside and took her hand, the same hand that had managed his household, raised his children, held champagne glasses at 1,000 parties where she'd smiled and been ignored. I see you now, he whispered. I see you, Shuga. Please don't leave me. Please give me the chance to prove I can do better. Her fingers didn't move. The machines breathed for her, beeped for her, lived for her. And Chan sat in the sterile hospital light, still wearing his blood-stained Tom Ford shirt, and finally understood what he'd almost lost. The wrong apology. Shuga woke in increments over the next 36 hours, consciousness returning in fragments like a puzzle reassembling itself. First sound, the mechanical rhythm of ventilators and monitors. Then sensation, the scratch of hospital sheets, the ache in her throat from the breathing tube. Then memory, the champagne flute, the poison, Chan's face finally showing something besides cold pragmatism. When she finally opened her eyes fully, he was there. He looked terrible, unshaven, exhausted, his expensive suit replaced by wrinkled casual clothes that suggested he hadn't left the hospital since she'd arrived. There was something else on the bedside table, catching the fluorescent light with calculated brilliance. Jewelry. A Cartier box, specifically. The kind that held the sort of apology that cost more than most people's yearly salary. Shuga stared at it with a numbness that had nothing to do with the toxin still filtering out of her system. Even now. Even after she'd nearly died because she'd felt so erased by his neglect that poison felt like escape. Even after all of that, his first instinct was to solve the problem with money. "You're awake." Chan's voice was rough from disuse and emotion. He reached for her hand, but Shuga pulled it away, the gesture small but deliberate. "How long?" Her throat hurt from the breathing tube, made the words come out raspy. "Almost 2 days. The doctors say you're going to make it. No permanent neurological damage, though they want to monitor you for another week." He paused, searching her face for something. "You scared the hell out of me, Shuga." "Good." She said it flatly, without inflection. "Someone should have been scared." Chan flinched like she'd hit him. "I brought you something." "To show you." He reached for the Cartier box, but Shuga cut him off with a harsh laugh that hurt her damaged throat. "Jewelry? You think jewelry is the answer here?" "I thought." He stopped, actually hearing himself. "I wanted to show you that I—" "What? That you're sorry? That you value me?" Shuga's voice was getting stronger, anger burning through the fog of medication. "Chan, I have a drawer full of apology jewelry. Earrings for the business dinners you missed. A bracelet for our anniversary you forgot. A necklace for every time you chose the organization over our family. I could open my own damn Cartier boutique with all the ways you've tried to buy your way out of actually being present." The box sat between them like evidence. Chan's hand hovered over it, then fell to his lap. For the first time in their marriage, he looked genuinely lost. "Then what do you want? Tell me what to do." "I want you to understand why I drank that poison." Shuga met his eyes, held them. "I want you to understand that it wasn't heroic. It wasn't even brave. I drank it because in that moment, dying felt like less pain than living another day in a marriage where I'm furniture." "You're not. Don't." She held up a hand, the one with the 4 still taped to it. "Don't tell me I'm not furniture when you can't remember the last time you asked me how I was doing. When our children have learned to stop asking when Daddy's coming home because the answer is always soon, and it's always a lie. When your associates bow to me at parties and talk over me in the same breath." Chan's jaw worked, his hands clenching and unclenching. "I was trying to build something for us. For the family. The empire. The empire is eating you alive, Chan. And it's already eaten me. I'm so far gone in my own life that I had to swallow poison to prove I existed." The tears came then, hot and angry. "Do you know what that feels like? To be so lonely in your own marriage that death seems like a reasonable alternative." The machines beeped in the silence that followed. Somewhere down the hall, someone was paging a doctor. The Cartier box sat unopened, its promise of expensive absolution rejected. The Matriarch's wisdom. The Matriarch arrived the next morning while Chan was in the cafeteria, having been ordered by the nursing staff to eat something or be removed from the hospital. Shuga was sitting up, picking at hospital oatmeal and watching the news cycle report on a medical emergency at a prominent family's private residence. No details, of course. The Lee family controlled the narrative even in crisis. "You embarrassed my son." The matriarch settled into the visitor's chair with the regal composure of someone who'd never asked permission to occupy any space. "In his own mother's house, you made him look weak." Shuga set down her spoon, too tired for games. "With respect, Mother Lee, your son managed to look weak all by himself." A smile ghosted across the older woman's face, there and gone like smoke. "I raised him to be strong, to survive in a world that devours the soft and unprepared. I taught him to calculate, to strategize, to never show vulnerability." She paused, her fingers finding the diamond brooch on her lapel, her late husband's first gift, worn to every significant event for 50 years. "I taught him everything except how to love someone who wasn't as hard as he'd become." "Then you failed him." The words came out before Shuga could stop them, but she didn't take them back. "Because he's brilliant at running an empire and terrible at being human. And I can't be the only one doing the work of keeping him connected to humanity." The matriarch was quiet for a long moment, her survivor's eyes assessing Shuga with new attention. "Tell me the truth. Did you drink that poison to save him, or to escape him?" There it was. The question everyone was circling around, but only this woman had the courage to ask directly. "Both," Shuga said quietly. "I saw the poison and I knew it would kill him. And in that moment, I thought about all the reasons I should warn him, should knock the glass away, should preserve my children's father." She met the matriarch's gaze. "And then I thought about how exhausted I am. How invisible. How thoroughly erased I've become in my own life. And I thought, maybe if I drink it, maybe if I take the death that was meant for him, maybe that will finally make him see me. Maybe that's the only way to be remembered as more than just useful." "So you attempted suicide by assassination." "I attempted to matter." The distinction felt important, even if mattering meant dying. The matriarch was silent, processing. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. "I was you once. Different circumstances, same erasure. I married into this life young, gave up medical school to be the perfect wife to a man who built an empire on ruthlessness. I became invisible so he could be visible. I translated myself into something that fit into the gaps of his world. How did you survive it?" "I didn't. Not really." The admission was stark. "I became the matriarch because the wife died somewhere along the way. I traded personhood for power, warmth for survival. And when my husband died, I was free, but I'd forgotten who I'd been before I'd learned to disappear." She leaned forward, her eyes intense. "Don't become me, Shuga. Don't trade your entire self for the privilege of being attached to a powerful man. You still have time to save yourself. Even if saving myself means leaving? Especially then." The matriarch stood, smoothed her suit. "I will tell you what I told my son when he was 7 and threw a tantrum because he couldn't control the weather. Some things cannot be forced. They can only be earned. If he wants you to stay, he will have to earn you. Every day. For the rest of his life." She paused at the door. "And if he doesn't?" "Then you take your children and you build a life that doesn't require you to nearly die to be seen. You're still young. You still have choices." After she left, Shuga sat with those words. Choices. She'd almost forgotten what those felt like. The mercy confession. Chan came back that evening, armed not with jewelry but with questions. He sat in the visitor's chair his mother had vacated hours earlier and looked at his wife, really looked, with a tension that felt almost painful in its intensity. Tell me the truth, he said. Not the version you think I can handle. The actual truth. Shuga was tired of protecting him from reality. Which truth do you want? The truth about why I learned Korean so well? So I could understand exactly how thoroughly your associates dismissed me. The truth about our children? Mina thinks you don't love her because you've missed her last 6 dance recitals. Jay stopped making you cards because you never opened them. She paused. Or do you want the truth about the poison? All of it. His voice was steady, but his hands were shaking. I want all of it. So she told him. About the years of being professionally helpful and personally invisible. About the loneliness that had calcified into numbness. About watching their children learn to not need him because he was never available to be needed. About the party guests who complimented her hosting while discussing business as if she wasn't standing right there. About the slow erosion of self that came from being appreciated like good infrastructure, essential but not requiring maintenance. And the poison? Chan's voice was barely above a whisper. I saw it, Shuga said. I saw the wrong shimmer in the champagne, and I knew immediately what it was. I have a biochemistry degree, Chan. I'm not just a pretty face that hosts your parties. I knew it was aconite or something similar. I knew you'd die if you drank it. Then why? Because for just a moment, I thought, what would it be like to not be here? To not have to manage everyone's expectations and smooth over every social rough edge and raise our children essentially alone while maintaining the fiction that we're a happy family. She met his eyes. And then I thought, if I'm going to die anyway, if I'm that tired of existing like this, at least dying to save you gives me a purpose. At least then I'm not just the woman who couldn't hack it as a crime boss's wife. At least then I'm heroic instead of broken. The confession hung between them like a third presence in the room. Chan's face had gone pale, his usual control completely shattered. You tried to kill yourself. I tried to escape. The poison was just the socially acceptable method. Shuga's laugh was bitter. Can you imagine if I'd just left? If I'd taken the kids and filed for divorce? Your organization would have seen it as weakness. Your enemies would have exploited it. Our children would have grown up ashamed. But drinking poison to save you? That's tragic. That's noble. That's a story that doesn't make me a failure. Jesus Christ, Shuga. Chan's hands were in his hair, his careful composure completely destroyed. You'd rather die than divorce me? I'd rather die than keep living as a ghost in my own life. The distinction mattered. The poison wasn't about you, Chan. It was about me. About the fact that I've disappeared so thoroughly that I couldn't remember what I wanted anymore. What I liked. Who I was before I learned to translate myself into something that fit into your world. I did that to you. Not a question. A statement of fact. We did that to me. Shuga was too tired to let him take all the blame. You neglected me. I let you. You built an empire. I enabled it by managing everything you didn't have time for. We created this together, this marriage where I'm essential infrastructure and you're an absent landlord." Chon was quiet for a long time, processing. When he spoke again, his voice was raw. "What do you want from me? Tell me what to do and I'll do it." "That's the problem, Chon. You're still thinking like a boss. Still waiting for marching orders. Still treating our marriage like a logistics problem that can be solved with the right strategy." Shuga shook her head. "I don't want you to fix this because I told you how. I want you to figure out how to be a person who cares about me without needing instructions." "I don't know how. I know." The admission was almost gentle. "Your mother raised you to be hard because soft people don't survive in your world. And I married you knowing what you were. But I'm not strong enough to keep being invisible, Chon. I'm not built to be background in my own life. Either you learn how to see me, really see me, or I need to leave before I disappear completely." The machines beeped. The hospital hummed with its familiar sounds of crisis and care. And Chon Li, who'd built an empire on calculated ruthlessness, finally confronted the fact that he couldn't calculate his way out of this. "Tell me about the poison," he said quietly. "Tell me what it felt like." Shuga closed her eyes, remembered. "It felt like mercy. It felt like finally being important enough to be worth dying for. It felt like proof that I existed." She opened her eyes, met his gaze. "And when I woke up in this hospital bed and saw that jewelry box, I realized that even dying wasn't enough to make you understand that I don't need expensive things. I need you to be present, to be real. To be the man I married before the empire ate him alive. I'm sorry." Chan's voice broke on the words. "Shuga, I'm so goddamn sorry." "I know. But sorry isn't enough. Sorry doesn't change the fact that our children are growing up without you. That I've spent 6 years being professionally grateful for crumbs. That I had to swallow poison to finally have this conversation." She reached for his hand, held it. "I love you, Chon. I've always loved you. But I can't love you at the expense of loving myself. Not anymore." The truth of it settled between them like snow, cold and clean and impossible to ignore. Dismantling the empire. Chon left the hospital at 2 a.m. and drove to the Lee family estate in Pacific Palisades. The house was still technically a crime scene, though the investigation had been quietly managed through appropriate channels, the benefits of having city officials on the organization's payroll. He stood in the room where his wife had collapsed, where the champagne flute had spilled its toxic contents across marble that probably cost more than most people's houses. His phone buzzed. Another crisis. A shipment held up in customs. A territorial dispute requiring his immediate attention. The endless machinery of the empire demanding to be fed. Chon turned off his phone. The silence was deafening. He'd spent 30 years building this organization, turning his father's regional operation into a West Coast dynasty. He'd sacrificed sleep, relationships, peace of mind. He'd become exactly what the work required: hard, calculating, untouchable. And he'd almost lost the only thing that actually mattered because he'd forgotten that empires built on fear are just elaborate houses of cards waiting for the wrong breeze. The Matriarch found him there an hour later, still standing in the room where his wife had nearly died. "The Park faction has been handled," she said without preamble. The bodyguard confessed to everything. We've made examples where examples were needed. I don't care. Chon said it and meant it. Mother, I don't care about the park faction or territory or shipping routes. I care that my wife tried to kill herself because I made her feel so invisible that death looked like escape. His mother settled into a chair with her characteristic grace. So what will you do about it? I don't know. The admission felt like failure. She wants me to figure out how to be present without being told how. She wants me to care without needing instructions. But I've spent so long being the boss that I don't remember how to just be Chon. Then remember. The matriarch's voice was sharp. You were Chon Li before you were the Li family heir. You had interests beyond logistics. You laughed without calculating the strategic value of the moment. You loved without measuring the cost-benefit analysis. She paused. Your father made the same mistake. Built an empire and forgot to build a life. I won't watch you repeat his failures. The organization needs. The organization, his mother interrupted, will survive without your constant attention. But your wife won't. Your children won't. And eventually, you won't. She stood, crossed to where he was still frozen in place. You're 43 years old, Chon. You've spent 20 years building power. Maybe it's time to learn how to actually live with it. Chon thought about Shuga in that hospital bed, tubes still pumping toxins from her system, telling him that sorry wasn't enough. He thought about his children, who'd stopped expecting him at bedtime because disappointment hurt more than absence. He thought about the empire he'd built and the family he'd neglected and the mathematics that suddenly didn't add up. I want to step back, he said slowly, testing the words. Not leave entirely, but step back. Let the underbosses handle more. Actually delegate instead of controlling everything. The organization will see it as weakness. Let them. Chon turned to face his mother. They already saw me as weak when someone poisoned my drink in your house. They already questioned my leadership because I married outside the culture and let my attention split. Maybe it's time to show them that strength isn't about controlling everything. Maybe strength is about knowing what actually matters. The matriarch smiled, the expression transforming her face into something almost young. That's the first smart thing you've said in years. Over the next week, while Shuga recovered in the hospital, Chon systematically began dismantling his total control over the empire. He promoted 3 underbosses to handle day-to-day operations. He established clear boundaries for when he would and wouldn't be available. He walked away from a major territory negotiation to be at the hospital when Shuga had a panic attack about coming home. The organization talked, of course. Whispered about weakness and distraction and whether the Li family was losing its edge. Chon let them talk. He was too busy learning his daughter's favorite songs and his son's fears about the dark to care about speculation. You're really doing this, Shuga said on her 8th day in the hospital, watching him decline a phone call from a shipping crisis that apparently required his immediate attention. I'm really doing this. Chon set his phone face down on the bedside table. I can't undo 6 years of neglect in a week. I know that. But I can start showing up. I can start being present. I can start learning how to be a person instead of just a boss. It's going to be hard. Shuga's voice was careful, like she was afraid to hope. The empire won't like having less of your attention. Your associates will push back. There will be consequences. Let there be consequences. Chon took her hand, the one without the four. I've spent my entire adult life managing consequences for business decisions. Maybe it's time to accept some consequences for personal ones. Like being a terrible husband and an absent father and building a life that almost killed the person I love most. Shuga's eyes filled with tears. Don't make promises you can't keep, Chon. I'm not promising perfect. I'm promising present. I'm promising that I'll try. That I'll fail sometimes, but I'll keep trying. That I'll learn how to see you without needing you to almost die to get my attention. He paused. Is that enough? To start. She was quiet for a long time, studying his face. Ask me again in 6 months. When the novelty has worn off and the empire is demanding your attention again. When our kids have had disappointments and victories and you've been there for them. When I've had bad days and you've noticed without me having to tell you. She squeezed his hand. Ask me then if it's enough. Fair enough. Chon stood, leaned over, kissed her forehead with a gentleness that felt rusty from disuse. I'll earn you back, Shuga. However long it takes. Chapter 10. Starting at the sink. 3 months later, on a Tuesday morning in March, Chon Li stood at the kitchen sink of their Pacific Palisades home and burned toast. The smoke alarm went off for the 3rd time. Mina was crying because her favorite purple shirt was in the laundry, and Jay had just announced he'd forgotten to study for his math test. It was chaos. It was messy. It was perfect. Shuga came downstairs in yoga pants and one of Chan's old t-shirts, her natural hair pulled back in a silk scarf, and stopped in the doorway to take in the scene. Chon wrestling with the smoke alarm. Their children arguing over the last clean bowl for cereal. The kitchen counter covered in burnt toast crumbs and spilled orange juice, and what appeared to be an attempt at pancakes that had gone catastrophically wrong. You're still here. She said it like a question, like she was still half expecting him to vanish back into the empire. I'm still here. Chon climbed down from the chair he'd been standing on, smoke alarm finally silenced. I promised the underbosses I'd handle the Shanghai negotiation this afternoon, but mornings are ours. Mornings are always ours now. It was the rule they'd established. Mornings and evenings belong to family, barring actual life or death emergencies. The organization had chafed at first, tested the boundaries, but Chon had held firm. He'd missed 6 years of mornings. He wasn't missing any more. Mina ran to Shuga, still upset about the purple shirt. Daddy said we'd do laundry together after school and I could help fold, but I need the purple shirt now. The purple shirt needs to be washed, baby girl. Shuga smoothed her daughter's hair, met Chan's eyes over the child's head. But I bet Daddy can help you pick out something equally fabulous. Can I wear the pink one with the sparkles? Mina looked up at her father with wide eyes, and Chon felt his heart contract at the simple fact that she was asking him, including him, treating him like a parent instead of a distant authority figure. The pink one with the sparkles is perfect, he said. Very fashion-forward. Very you. Mina beamed and ran back upstairs. Jay was still at the table, stress-eating burnt toast and looking miserable about his math test. Hey, buddy. Chon slid into the chair next to his son. Tell me about this math test. I forgot to study. Jay's voice was small, defeated. I'm going to fail. Okay. What time is the test? Third period. After lunch. Chan checked his watch, did the mental calculation. The Shanghai call could be moved. Or delegated. Or honestly, postponed entirely because what mattered more, cement imports or his son's confidence. Get your textbook. We've got 2 hours before school. I bet we can cram enough to at least get you a passing grade. Jay's eyes went wide. You know algebra? I used to. Before I forgot how to be good at anything besides business. Chan ruffled his son's hair. Come on. Let's see what I remember. They sat at the kitchen table for the next 90 minutes, working through quadratic equations and distributive properties while Shuga made actual edible toast and packed lunches and got their daughter dressed in the sparkly pink shirt. It was domestic and ordinary, and Chan felt more present than he had in years. When the kids left for school, Jay significantly less stressed, Mina twirling to show off her outfit, Chan and Shuga were alone in the kitchen. She started loading the dishwasher and he helped without being asked, learning the rhythm of their shared space. You moved the Shanghai call, she said. It wasn't a question. I moved the Shanghai call. Chan rinsed a glass, handed it to her. The organization will survive without me for one morning. Jay needed me more than they did. Shuga was quiet for a moment, processing. You're really doing this. Not just saying you will. Actually doing it. I'm doing it. He paused. I'm not perfect at it. I still check my phone too much. I still have to remind myself that being present matters more than being in control. But I'm trying, Shuga. Every day I'm trying. She turned to face him, and he saw something in her expression that had been missing for years, hope mixed with cautious trust. I see it. The kids see it. Mina made you a card last week. Did you open it? I did. Chan felt his throat tighten. It's on my desk. Next to the picture of us from our wedding. The one where you're laughing because I stepped on your dress during the first dance. You keep a picture on your desk now? I keep several. He pulled out his phone, showed her the lock screen, a photo from 2 weeks ago, the 4 of them at the beach, messy and sandy and genuinely smiling. I want to remember what matters, especially when the Empire is demanding I forget. Shuga set down the dish she'd been holding, crossed to where he stood, and wrapped her arms around him. He held her carefully, aware that trust was still fragile between them, that they were rebuilding from rubble. Ask me again, she whispered against his chest. Ask you what? If it's enough. You said to ask in 6 months. It's only been 3. But ask me anyway. Chan pulled back enough to see her face. Is this enough? Me trying to be present? Me burning toast and helping with math homework and moving business calls so I can be here? Shuga smiled, and it reached her eyes for the first time in longer than he could remember. It's not enough yet, but it's getting there. Ask me again in 3 more months. And keep showing up. Keep trying. Keep being this version of Chan who remembers that empire means nothing if you lose everything that makes life worth living. I can do that. He kissed her, soft and careful, like they were learning each other all over again. I'll keep showing up. I'll keep trying. I'll keep earning you. Outside, Los Angeles continued its perpetual motion, the empire continued its operations, and the organization continued to function without his constant micromanagement. Inside, Chon Li stood in his kitchen with his wife in his arms, surrounded by breakfast dishes and family chaos, and finally understood what his mother had tried to tell him years ago. Some things cannot be forced. They can only be earned. He was still earning Shuga back, one burnt toast morning at a time. And for the first time in 6 years, he believed they might actually make it. The poison that almost killed her had become the catalyst that saved them both. 3 seasons passed in the Li household, measured not in territory gained or shipping routes secured, but in dance recitals attended, homework sessions completed, and family dinners where Chan's phone stayed face down on the counter. Shuga never forgot the taste of almonds and endings, the way poison had felt like mercy before it became a reckoning. But she also learned that some marriages don't survive on the foundation they started with. They survive by being torn down to bedrock and rebuilt with better materials. Chon still ran the empire, but he no longer let it run him. The organization adapted, or it didn't. Some partnerships dissolved when he refused to sacrifice family dinners for territory negotiations. Other alliances strengthened when rivals realized that a boss who could prioritize what mattered was more dangerous than one who controlled everything and valued nothing. On their 7th wedding anniversary, Chon gave Shuga a gift that wasn't jewelry. It was a key to a small art studio in Santa Monica, the lease paid for a year, the space empty and waiting for her to remember what she loved before she learned to disappear. She cried in the middle of the restaurant, not from sadness but from the shocking recognition of being truly seen. "I don't know what I want to create yet," she'd whispered, holding the key like a promise. "Then you have time to figure it out," Chon had answered. "We both do." The matriarch, watching her son learn to be human again, finally allowed herself to hope that the Li family legacy might evolve into something that didn't require its women to become ghosts. She taught her grandchildren Korean with patience, attended Mina's dance recitals with pride, and sometimes looked at Shuga with an expression that might have been admiration or might have been recognition of the courage it takes to nearly die in order to finally live. The bodyguard who'd facilitated the poisoning was never seen again. The park faction that had ordered the hit learned what happened when you mistook a distracted boss for a weak one. Chan's response had been surgical, devastating, and absolutely final. He could be present for his family and still be feared by his enemies. The two weren't mutually exclusive. But none of that mattered as much as the morning Shuga found Chon at the kitchen sink again, this time successfully making pancakes while Jay explained a science project and Mina practiced ballet positions in the breakfast nook. She stood in the doorway and watched her husband be a father, be a partner, be a person who existed outside of strategy and control. "You're staring," Chon said without turning around, somehow aware of her presence in the way he'd once been aware of territorial threats. "I'm remembering," Shuga corrected, walking into her kitchen, her life, her marriage that had survived poison and neglect and the long road back to something real. "I'm remembering what hope feels like." Chon turned, spatula in hand, flower somehow in his hair, and smiled at her with the expression of a man who'd learned that the most important empire wasn't built on fear and logistics. It was built on showing up, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard, every single day until showing up became the foundation instead of the exception. The champagne flute that almost killed him and nearly destroyed her sat in a police evidence locker somewhere, tagged and catalogued and forgotten. But the family that survived it, scarred, healing, learning to be whole, gathered around a breakfast table in Pacific Palisades and built something better than either empire or perfection. They built presence. They built truth. They built a life where no one had to swallow poison to prove they mattered. And that, Shuga thought as Chan served burnt-edge pancakes with a flourish and their children laughed and complained in equal measure, was worth surviving for. Thank you for following Shuga and Chan's journey through poison, pain, and the long road to redemption. If this story moved you, made you think, or reminded you that sometimes love requires tearing everything down to rebuild it right, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories about complicated love, second chances, and the courage it takes to choose yourself even when the cost seems unbearable. Drop a comment below and tell me, what did you feel? Which moment hit you hardest? Have you ever felt invisible in your own life? What would you have done in Shuga's position? I read every single comment and I want to know what resonated with you, what made you angry, what gave you hope. Your engagement helps these stories reach others who need to hear them. People sitting in their own versions of emotional solitary confinement, wondering if they're asking for too much when all they want is to be seen. Subscribe if you believe stories should challenge us, not just entertain us. Like if you appreciate narratives that don't offer easy answers but show the messy, painful, beautiful work of actually choosing life over escape. And comment where you're watching from. I want to say hello and know how far this story is traveling. From Port Harcourt to Paris, from Atlanta to Australia, let me know you're there. Let me know this story mattered to you the way Shuga's survival mattered to Chan. See you in the next story. Until then, remember, you don't have to swallow poison to prove you exist. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply refuse to disappear.